So now let's look at part two. Part two of this deals with exactly what are some of the basic goals of macroeconomics. First of all, just as a reminder, macroeconomics by definition is the branch of economics that studies how the overall economy works. So we think about markets, business, consumers, government, and how they all behave. It examines economy-wide phenomena such as inflation, price levels, rate of economic growth, national income, gross domestic product, and changes in unemployment. So some of the basic questions: what causes unemployment? What causes inflation? What stimulates economic growth? It really attempts to measure how well the economy is really performing for you and me. If the economy is performing well, my standard of living and your standard of living is going to be better. Our lives are going to be better. If the economy is not performing so well, things get tough for us pretty quick. So governments and businesses are very interested in this. We have to really understand what is driving that change. What makes it good if it's good? What makes it bad if it's bad? And based on that, then we can use it to project what we need to do in order to make sure that it continues to be good going forward. So considering all that, then we got to think about what are the goals of studying macroeconomics. The overreaching goal of macroeconomics is really to maximize the standard of living so that we all live well, and to achieve this thing called stable economic growth. We want to have growth that continues, and from growth, the economy gets bigger, our lives get better. So the goal is really supported by some key objectives that government needs to enforce, and that is we want to minimize unemployment, maximize employment, increase productivity, more product out for the amount of effort in, controlling inflation, keep prices from increasing too rapidly, and more. So key goals, and we're going to look at each of these in turn. Improving standard of living, economic growth, full employment, or as full as possible employment, stable prices, viable balance of international trade, equitable distribution of income so that we don't have very rich and very poor people, and a manageable government debt and deficit. So our very first goal is an improved standard of living. What exactly is that? Well, standard of living means how good we live in our lives and if we have enough money. So each generation really wants to improve standard of living for the next. We want to be better off, okay? And really our standard of living is determined by our income. So effectively we want our incomes to rise. And if you look at this graphic, you can see that that's been very much the case over the last 100 years. We've seen incomes steadily rise in Canada. And that accounts for us being a fairly wealthy nation. So each decade there has been improvement. And, if you look now, you see around $55,000 is where we're headed towards. So a second major feature that macroeconomics needs to concern itself with, or a major goal, is economic growth. Now, economic growth involves making the economy grow. So Canada's present high standard of living is really the result of actions of the past. Improvements in our social and economic climate have meant that companies have become more productive, meaning making more with less, and it has forced them to become, competition has forced them to become inventive and innovative, which means that we can make more with less, again, driving up productivity. All things added together in terms of production in a year creates what we call our gross domestic product, which is the sum value of all things made in Canada during the year. This GDP has increased steadily for the last 90 years. And with this increase in GDP comes an increase in their income. In fact, Canadians have seen a six-fold increase in their incomes over the last 90 years. Now, so we know we got good economic growth, but it really has to be managed because the downside of economic growth are the negative effects of high rates of pollution, traffic congestion, noise, and the stress. So it's a balancing act to get good growth while minimizing the negative effects of that growth. Another very important macroeconomic goal is full or as full as possible employment. As people work, they make more money. As they make more money, their standard of living goes up and they can buy and live better. Now, government works very hard at creating full employment. We need to create economic conditions out there that help companies grow, which means they'll hire more people and drive more jobs. But you'll always have a certain amount of unemployment because the fact is that not everyone wants to work, number one. And number two, people may not be trained for the jobs that exist. So we have what's called some sort of a difference between the type of job that's required, or the type of worker that's required, and the worker that's available. So sometimes we run into this gap. Now, full employment has been challenging in Canada, and generally our rate of unemployment has been hovering around 6% across the country. In Newfoundland and Labrador, it's probably double that. But it is important for an economy to have as full of employment as possible in order to create that high-quality standard of living. Another big macroeconomic goal is the stability of prices. We want to ensure that inflation, which is a measure of how prices are growing, is as low as possible. Now, if you're a seller, you might like high inflation because high inflation means you're making more money on the product. But government tries to manage inflation, and most importantly, it tries to make inflation manageable, meaning that we can predict when it's going to happen, how much is going to happen, and that way we can kind of manage for it. Now, there's often the conflict existing between full employment and stable prices, because as more people become employed, we got more dollars chasing fewer products, which tends to drive up prices. So there's a balance that needs to be made with regards to employment and prices. Now, Canada's done very well over the last number of years at keeping inflation low. In the last year, that is the 2022, we have seen prices increase dramatically, and this has shown a period of great inflation. In fact, it's the highest inflation we've seen in Canada in quite a while. This undercuts people's ability to buy. If things are 10% more expensive, your buying power has been cut by 10%. Now, and it also drives up inflation with regards to wages, because people are going to look for higher wages in order to compensate, and this creates inflationary pressures as well. As we've seen with an earlier example with the benefits of trade in the previous video, Canada is truly a world trading nation. We rely on trade because we produce lots and lots of products here that the world wants to buy. The world buys them and contributes to our overall economy. We, in turn, buy a lot of products from abroad because we can't produce bananas, for example, here in Canada. It's not worth buying. So what trade does is it forces us or allows us to make the products that we do well, so we can do them more efficiently and more effectively than any other country, and trade them for things that those countries can do more efficiently and more effectively. So the power of trade is very much demonstrated in the health of the Canadian economy. The difference between what a country exports and what a country imports is called its balance of trade. If we look at Canada, if we look at this example here, you can see that we tend to be great importers and great exporters. Just to illustrate the value of trade, if we look at the world's top trading nations, those are also the world's richest countries. So trade benefits our economy and benefits us. The next economic goal deals with the equitable distribution of income, and it's as much a social as an economic factor. We can really judge a country by how well it treats its poorest people. Okay? Canada is not outstanding, but on the other hand, it is better than most countries. Because if we can increase national prosperity, it only works well if everybody's prosperity goes up, not just a select few. So what government needs to do is to be able to create a system that allows for a relatively equitable distribution of income, while at the same time not disincentivizing people to work hard and contribute more and receive a better benefit for that. So it's kind of a trade-off type of situation. If we look at this diagram here, we can see how money is distributed within our economy. If we look at the various quartiles or quarters, we can see that the poorest 20% receive about 4% of the national income, whereas the top 20% receive just over 40%. And that figure really hasn't changed too much in the last 20 years, so at least we're consistent. If we contrast ourselves with the United States, the top 20% earn 9.2 times as much as the lowest 20%. Compared to other G7 countries, Canada's performance is quite good at 6.2, but it's distinctively average in the world rankings, coming in 47th. Since the average is 7.7, Canada's distribution of income is relatively more equitable than other countries. Finally, in macroeconomics, we look at the manageability, we'll call it, of government debt and government deficit. First, a little description of what a debt is. A debt is the total money owing by government. Okay, so effectively, it's like your credit card bill. It is how much money you owe. Deficit, on the other hand, is a relative term per year, and that is, does the government spend more in a given year than it takes in? The combination of years and years of deficits create the debt. So why would a government run a deficit? Well, the reality is sometimes the economy is not doing very well. For example, when COVID-19 hit us, a lot of people got laid off, the economy slowed down dramatically. So government's role at that stage is to be able to say to people, we'll do something for you. We'll reduce interest rates, we'll provide funding, we'll do things that help fill the gap for your income loss. That means that government spending is going to go up, which normally would create a deficit. In other words, more money is being spent than what comes in. But we would argue that the social benefit exceeds the economic cost there. So oftentimes government will do that in order to spur the economy along and spend more in bad times. In good times, the theory is that government will spend less because there's lots of jobs and lots of money floating around. So government can say, oh no, we're not going to spend so much now. We won't put money into the economy. We'll save money and create a surplus, which will help eradicate the debt, which can be used to pay down the debt effectively. And it won't cause the economy to get overheated. Governments look for that magic combination of spending when they need to spend and not spending when the economy is doing really well. It may or may not happen. Oftentimes, politics gets in the way and government spends when it really shouldn't be spending, such as what we had happen in the 1980s and 90s. Since then, government has done a very good job in terms of spending within its means. So we have seen that expenditures and revenues have been very close together. Canada has really outperformed most countries managing its deficit. In fact, Canada has produced budget surpluses in the mid-90s. Canada is ranked amongst the top G7 countries in managing its budget over the past 20 years. So there you go. Government and Bank of Canada work very hard in order to achieve these goals that we just described. What we're going to look at in this course is really the application of how we achieve those goals. So over the course of the next few units, we'll be looking more deeply at these. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks.